is a seasoned cybersecurity, privacy, and technology leader with over 2 decades of experience driving enterprise cybersecurity, regulatory compliance, and digital transformation across financial services, pharmaceutical, healthcare, and immigration industries. He has successfully built and led global teams of multidisciplinary specialists, directed large scale digital transformation initiatives, and developed business centric security and privacy programs tailored for globally regulated environments. His hands on leadership approach enables organizations to achieve cyber risk reduction while aligning security with business growth in an increasingly digital first world. Today, we have Sir here to deliver a lecture on human risk management. And Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sai. That was quite an introduction. Appreciate it. And hello, everybody. Good afternoon, or almost good afternoon. I see quite a few known faces as well. Glad you guys could make time. Let me go ahead and bring up the slide that I have. And trust me, I won't bore you to death with thousands of slides. Uh, I just got about 10 slides to talk through. And oops, sorry, went somewhere else. All right. Um, if any one of you can tell me if you're able to see the screen.
Yes, sir, we can.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. All right, thank you very much. So, as I was saying, I don't have too many slides to talk about. I have put together information about human risk management, essentially from a practitioner's view. The intention today is to sort of talk about why human risk management is important. In cybersecurity, we do a lot of processes, programs, and so on and so forth, but I still believe that this is one area which needs a lot of focus, needs a lot of importance as well, and hence, the presentation today about human risk management. Uh, Before we sort of start talking into what is human risk management and why insider risk is really really important, I wanted to talk about few of the very famous incidents that we all know of. We have heard about Edward Snowden, we have heard about Chelsea Manning, and so on and so forth. Very interestingly, there are humans at play, both in a good and a bad way, right? So Edward Snowden was an NSA contractor, National Security Agency contractor, and he literally walked away with a truckload of very, very sensitive global surveillance data, right? Harold Martin, he was an NSA contractor. He was working with a defense contractor in the US called Booz Allen Hamilton. He had access to almost 50 terabytes of very, very sensitive information over a span of 2 decades, right? He did not use it, but he was hoarding all of that information. Chelsea Manning, again, a US Army intelligence analyst. We know of the WikiLeaks, infamous WikiLeaks. A lot of diplomatic and surveillance documents were sort of leaked into in the public domain. And then we had several issues which involved an insider in organizations like Google. This gentleman in Google, there was a very sensitive project called Waymo, which was a self-driving car, and this person actually stole the schematics and the diagram because he had to join Uber, right? And then there are so many other cases with Tesla, Boeing, Capital One, Twitter, and so on and so forth. So if you look at some of these examples, human risk management is essentially nothing but looking at the human behavioral aspect that exists within an organization, which can sometimes be extremely risky. And the session today, I will try and delve into some of the behavioral aspect. I'm not a psychologist by any chance, but then as a practitioner, I think we have a very high degree of reliance on technology. And I wanted to speak about today, how can we make a shift from technology to a human-centric security as well, specifically keeping human risk management into the perspective, all right? Why does it matter? It matters because, one, there is a cost. So statistically, from the IBM Ponemons Institute Cost of Insider Risk Study, the Verizon's data breach investigation report, it articulates that the annual cost of an insider-related threat in the last year has been a staggering 16 million US dollars, which is a very high amount, of course. There has been about 8,000 total number of insider-related incidents, and these are the ones that have been disclosed and sort of talked about. On an average, there are about 24 incidents per company last year, and more than 309 organizations. And some of these organizations are very famous, well-known brands. They have experienced insider events. Astonishingly, in case of an insider event, on an average, it took about 86 days to even look at an incident, detect it, and even content it. So I think This is a very important eye opener for us cybersecurity professionals that we talk about dwell time. We talk about how quickly can we identify a cyber incident that is under play, but 86 days is a very, very long time. And then, of course, time is money. And then some of the organizations that took more than 90 days to respond to an event caused by an insider had a staggering amount of 18 billion in terms of the cumulative amount for the loss in itself. There are quite a few statistics. I'm not going to read through all of them, but essentially there are a few highlights that I wanted to talk about. One is almost 80% of the organizations have detected an increased velocity of insider threat. That means that there are people that are malicious, there are people that have committed accidental events that have led to a data breach or to an untoward incident for an organization. There has been a 28% increase in the insider driven data exposure in itself, right? So, and in each of our organizations, I'm sure we see emails being misrouted to a wrong individual or a data being uploaded to a wrong, customer account or being sent to a wrong user. And these are very, very rampant, right? Um, 80% of the cybersecurity organizations have sort of identified leadership or people with a sensitive senior position as the greatest amount of risk. One, because they have access to the high value information, and they're also very often targeted. And then I found it rather funny that 25% of the people or 25% of the insider threat events are purely caused with a malicious intent in itself, right? So we'll talk about how different kind of incidents are and how do we classify users depending on the intent and motive. But then this is a stark reality that we are looking at that, this is a real problem. We put a lot of focus on some other security programs like GRC, regulatory compliance, patch management, vulnerability management. All of these are very, very important. But I think human risk management is an element which really needs a lot of attention, right? And then one interesting point in the frame of DPDP now coming into India is almost 73% of the compromised data is PII in nature. Now imagine if you're an organization in India and you process personal information, and so the risk is not just about the data, not about the cost, but also about reputation and regulatory compliance in itself. And I think this is an area that needs a lot of focus, and we'll do a deep dive as we move along. Yeah. One of the key message that I have for this particular slide is, I always talk about how technology itself is inadequate to secure an organization. And this is, this particular slide essentially articulates that fact that human behavior really, really matters a lot. Why is it a material risk, right? So there are cyber actors, and we know of external actors and internal actors, but specifically when you look at an internal actor, I think it is really important and very, very material because number one, it involves humans, right? And then every human being is driven by emotions, all right? There is no human being who doesn't have an emotion, and most of our actions are directed by our emotions in itself. And because we are driven by emotions, we are prone to commit errors, and some of these errors become habits. Okay. And unfortunately, cyber criminals do not these days target systems, but they target people. They don't hack systems, they hack people, right? And each one of you can sort of go back and look at the events that you see in your organization. How many times it has happened that somebody has connected something they're not supposed to connect, or downloaded something that they're not supposed to download, right? And sometimes this really becomes a habit. You will definitely spot a very, very frequent offender, right? Now, statistically, while 85% of the breaches that we have seen historically are caused by human errors, and human errors can be accidental, human errors can be, miscellaneous type. It could be a mistake, it could be an human who has simply been outsmarted by an hacker, right? All of that is true. But what is really common is some of the human errors that have been constant for many, many years, right? So I've been doing security for close to 20 years, and I have always seen weak password is a problem. Sharing password is a problem. In spite of having the best of the tools, best of the security trainings, you will still find people clicking into a phishing URL or a phishing link. You will find people who does not handle sensitive data in the way that needs to be handled. You will find people who will accidentally or willfully abuse their privilege access. Somebody like an IT admin will go ahead and download a tool that they think is okay to use on a work computer, and then obviously, in spite of everything a security team does, there is a definitive lack of awareness and training, right? And hence, insider threats or any risk that emanates out of human beings is not just malicious all the time, because some of these are also habit driven. And it is important that for us as a security practitioner, we try and consciously understand those behavioral factors, those habits that needs to be transformed to create a secure organization in itself. All right. Now, when we talk about humans, I spoke about how human behavior is driven by emotions. What does an emotion create? Emotions create two things. One is motive and one is intent. All right. Now, if you were to classify human risk into four different ways based on the intent, you would find users or people that are malicious or has malicious intent in itself. The intent is caused to, purely to cause any harm. Then there are negligent users as well, or somebody who is utterly callous, very, very careless about policies, procedure, tools, and systems, and so on and so forth. And essentially, they cause a lot of harm through carelessness in itself. Then we have users who are generally and genuinely mistaken. They don't know, they commit a genuine mistake. And then there are users, they are good, but they are also being outsmarted, and they are reasonably being outmaneuvered by an adversary. And phishing is a very classic example of this. Yeah. If you talk about motives, and I think this is very important, and let's pay a little bit of attention here, because every error, every event that is committed by a human being, and not just in the cyber world, but also in the physical world as well, there is a motive. Why does a person commit a crime? Right? A crime is a combination of an intent, a motive, and an opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But understanding motive is very, very important when it comes to human risk management in itself. So one key motive is financial gain, right? How can I make more money? Obviously there are legit ways to make money, ethical ways to make money. There are also unethical ways to make money. And that could be a key motivation for somebody who will commit an error or commit a malicious act. The second intention is disgruntlement. Okay. And I think this is important because we spoke about humans and how humans are driven by emotions. So the emotional factor plays a large role in how our behaviors are shaped in itself. So you will definitely find people who are just not happy, with what they do. It could be, they feel that they have been wronged, a promotion has not been given, or they're not happy with the salary, and that causes resentment, that causes disgruntlement. And this is the number two motive for somebody who causes an error or an event in an organization. Number three is espionage. Many times we think this is only, exists in the fictions or novels or books or movies, but this is true. There could be an person or a contractor who can be hired by either a competition or by a foreign, organization, or by a foreign country who is known to be hostile in itself, right? And there has been enough cases of it. There was this infamous engineer who's working with Ford, and third generation Chinese American national, and he was on a deep cover, and he was purposefully being planted in the organization to be able to stay and steal schematics and diagrams of futuristic cars that Ford was planning to launch at some point in time. Then negligent actions, handling sensitive data, mishandling sensitive data, just being careless. These are that's number four. And then there is coercion. There are social engineering, there are deep fakes, there are blackmails, and we read of this, we get to know of this many, many times, where somebody's sensitive information has been compromised and the person has been blackmailed to do things that he or she would not do in normal circumstances, right? And then last but not the least, career advancement. Many times we see humans stealing information from the organizations that they are working with, or sabotaging systems purely for personal gain. It could be, pilfering an intellectual property or a trade secret purely for the competitive advantage. The Google Waymo case is a classic example where this individual stole all the diagrams and documentation because he was about to join in Uber so that he can increase his professional equity in the next organization that he's joining in, right? But as we take a step back and look at human risk management as a program for any organizations, let's not forget intent, let's not forget motive, because these two are the key linchpin of the entire risk management program in itself. And as I spoke earlier, a crime is often committed when there is a right combination of intent, motive, and opportunity, right? Now, while you cannot control intent or motive of an individual, you can to an extent, but you know, technically it's not possible to decide and decode and decipher how a person behaves or how his social wiring is being changed. I think one area that we cybersecurity professionals can definitely minimize and control is the opportunity. So you might have a person sitting in your ecosystem who has a bad intent, who has a right motive to cause damage to the organization. But if we can minimize that opportunity, we can stall a crime from happening. We can prevent a crime from happening. And that is very, very important point for this particular topic. And then insider risk management or insider threat monitoring is not something new. Many organizations do it. Almost every organizations do it. But unfortunately, some of the ways are very old. It's a very legacy sort of process, which I think in today's world might not cut it, might not be the best way to sort of go about it. Let's look at why some of these methods doesn't work, right? Number one, we don't have organizations where we have people fixed in a particular base location and working out of that particular location, right? So we have workers on a hybrid mode. We have workers on they're working remotely. There is bring your own device, bring your own computer. So the boundaries have essentially been blurred. So we need to take a fresher look, in a different approach towards looking at protection in itself. Second is there is a huge amount of reliance on the traditional methods, right? So I'm talking about signature-based detection, but if you look at how the attack landscape has changed, a lot of the adversarial efforts these days are technologically very, very advanced. There are deepfakes, there are voice spoofings, there are very stealthy ways to attack, which definitely circumvents and bypasses the traditional security tools that we currently have deployed in the organization, right? And then there are the frontline defense tools like a traditional DLP solution, data leakage solution. What do we do with them? We put an agent in all the systems, or maybe in the gateway or in the exchange, and then we start doing a dragnet monitoring. We basically, drink from the hose. We are flooded with zillions of alerts that comes our way, right? And I think that's very, very ineffective. And what of shadow IT? Somebody has connected a device that you don't know. It's not a managed device. Somebody has pinned up an instance in AWS or Azure that you have no control of. And because that device does not have a DLP, that device is the proverbial, chink in the armor. That's the device which is in a complete black hole in itself. So if you were to look at a modern approach to this, obviously there are tools and solutions that are available that leverages behavioral based analytics. We should take a look at that. There are tools, and then there are policies and procedures or systems that uses zero trust as a philosophy, not just a tool. And I think it is important to sort of think about that as well. And then many solutions these days comes inbuilt with user and entity behavior analytics. Yuba, how often are we using them? How optimized are these tools is a very important question. And are these being monitored in a real time? And I think that's something which is very important as well. And then I also think that the modern approach to a DLP is trying and figuring out how to look at an intelligent DLP solution, not just something that overly monitors all the channels, be it print, USB, web, or email, but essentially looking at what is the most risky here and what is the most anomalous in nature in itself, right? Some of the intelligent DLPs is something that we need to consider. And then other legacy methods, we always have this, unfounded trust on privileged users, and essentially privileged users does have the key to the kingdom, right? So if you look at the admins, if you look at the executives, if you look at the developers having a lot of, elevated access onto the machine, onto the system, they're the prime targets. If I am an attacker and if I need to compromise an organization, I would potentially fish out people who hold these positions. And it's very easy to do that recon from social engineering. I can go to LinkedIn, I can identify who the IT admin is or who is the developer, and then specifically target that particular individual to be able to get to his or her account. Because if I'm able to compromise him or her, I basically have the keys to the kingdom in itself, right? And then some of these legacy security tools does not have too much of a contextual understanding in itself. And this has been a problem everybody in the security world has been grappling with. We have a bunch of tools, and you can actually drown people with acronyms, right? From SIM to EDR to NGAV to DLP to UBA to God knows what. But many a times, all these tools are operated in a silo, right? There is no harmonization, there is no orchestration, and each of these tools, some of these tools are very, very noisy. They can generate millions of alerts every day. And if you have your internal security monitoring team or an outsourced SOC or an internal SOC, uh, can they really look into each and every alert and do justice to them? The answer is a definitive no. It is humanly not possible to look at every event that comes out of your ecosystem, right? And then our traditional defenses are always reactive. If you typically look at data exfiltration monitoring as a process, it has always been reactive in nature. You spot something after it is done. Once somebody has sent out a data in a different channel, that is when you go back and detect and go back and do a retrospective investigation to find out what was the context, why was it done, was it legit or not. But the damage is already done. The data is out of your ecosystem, out of your control in itself, right? And hence, the modern approach to it is, how do you control those privilege IDs? How do you control those IDs that have got elevated access? Can you think of using a privileged identity management or an access management solution? Can you vault these passwords so that the user does not know the passwords and they are, refreshed randomly? Without being exposed to the user in itself? Can you provide just-in-time access, giving the access when they need it, and once it is done, the time window is up, the access is revoked, right? Then some of the other methods are like risk correlation and analytics. And I think this is an area which needs a lot of focus, not just from us, the practitioners, but also from the OEMs and also from the traditional organizations that manufacture those tools, right? And then being proactive in nature, right? How do we? This is one complaint that I always have, and an area that I wish we can fix is, if you look at every organization, there's a huge amount of focus on analytics, but security as an area, because of the amount of signals that we generate, is a prime use case for running analytics. But how many times are we able to leverage those predictive analysis, or can bring in a machine learning algorithm to look at the data and start predicting even before the incident has actually occurred, right? And I think that's an opportunity collectively each one of us as a practitioner should sort of take back and see how can we impact, how can we bring that in, yeah? And then, like I said, the real key to be able to reduce the number of events or to be able to prevent the events is to minimize the window of opportunity, and because intent and motive will always exist in a human. In a traditional law enforcement world as well, if you see, there are police bandobast, there are visible presence of policemen in uniform in high risk zones, there are presence of CCTV, in high traffic areas. While all of these definitely works as a deterrent, it also minimizes the opportunity to commit a crime. So even if there is somebody, with a bad intention and the right motive to commit a crime, because of the lack of opportunity, the crime does not get committed. So is the case in a cyber world as well. So when you look at designing a control, when you look at a risk that is in front of you, and you have to figure out, how do you treat that risk? Do you want to mitigate it? Do you want to transfer it? Do you want to accept it? Do you want to handle it or transfer it? What is the window of opportunity? What can you do to reduce that opportunity? And I think many a times that will give you the right answer at the right time. Yeah. All right. So now I spoke about the problems. I spoke about why the traditional method of insider risk management or HRM does not work. But what is the right way, right? What is the futuristic approach to human resource management or human risk management? Like I was saying, it needs to be shift from a technology heavy to human-centric security, right? So while we will still have to use the tools and technologies to be able to detect and monitor, we will still need to find out a way, how does human-centric capabilities can be developed in our overall scheme of things, right? And to do that, I want to talk about 5 different elements of it, which I think is very, very important. One is this security culture. We deal with people, and people makes an organization, and we exist for the organization. We, in the sense of security teams, exist for the organization in itself. Hence, what is central to everything is people in itself, and we cannot just ignore it. And what helps a people drive the right behavior or do the right thing is the culture of the organization. And I think we are to go miles to be able to create the best security culture possible in an organization in itself. What does it mean? It means having an employee really, really empowered, not just by lip service, not just by saying that you're empowered. We will have to walk the talk. We will have to ensure that we are helping them with a lot of empowerment. And that means not yelling at them when they make mistakes. Yeah. Another way is positive reinforcement. How do you handle infraction? How do you handle a deviation from a process? How do you handle a mistake? Do you positively reinforce the right behavior, or do you use other methods that might backfire at some point in time? Yeah. Then um, we all do security trainings. Some of these trainings are, has just become a chore. Person joins in, does the induction, there's an annual security training, they do a formation, and they're all good, right? Are these trainings engaging? Are these trainings relevant? Or are they just mindlessly running the training, hitting on the next button one after another, taking a short quiz, and they are done just for the sake of compliance? We will have to think, how do we change that, right? And then most importantly, rewarding good behavior. We are very quick when it comes to pulling away an employee who has mistakenly clicked on a phishing email or has downloaded something and going back and reprimanding them. How often do we reward when they report an incident or report a phishing email, right? So I think rewarding good behavior is a very, very important aspect. So the first area that I want to focus towards an approach, futuristic approach towards HRM, is the culture in itself. And each one of us will have to play a large role in the culture. The second element I want to talk about is knowing the employee in itself. The unfortunate reality in our industry is the fact that we treat every employee in the same fashion. But does everybody has the same amount of access? Does everybody has the same amount of employment status? Does everybody has the same amount of understanding of right versus wrong? Probably not, right? And hence, we need to alter our ways of looking at employees by the role they carry, the access that they have, the kind of risk exposure that each one of them carry, depending on the access and type. So you think of a contractor versus a full-time agent. Think of a remote worker versus a worker who comes and works in the premises of the organization. Think about a worker who uses predominantly from a BYOD or a BYOC as opposed to a managed device, which has got all the bells and whistles installed onto it, right? And all of these are key to behavioral risk analytics. Otherwise, you just can't be cutting everybody from the same cookie cutter. It does not really work. The third important factor is zero trust. It's a much used and abused word, enough marketed, but I fundamentally support the principles of zero trust. That essentially means, do you have the ability to verify and grant access to a system or to a resource, depending on the condition and depending on the context? And a simple example to that can be looking at conditions. Is the user coming in from a geography that is allowed? Is a user coming in from an IP that is probably not blacklisted? Is a user coming in from and trying to access a system that the user should have access to? Those are the conditions. And the context is important. The context is what device, what time is the user trying to access? If you have a user in the US who's trying to access the device at the midnight, you should go back and ask these questions, that there is a contextual mismatch. Is it a legit access connection request or is it not, right? So that's where zero trust comes in. The fourth element, which I think we suck badly, is metrics and management. We are so focused on technology. We are so good in running our tools and doing the right things for security. We sort of have very less ability to generate meaningful metrics for measurement and improvement when it comes to cybersecurity at large, right? So while we have KRIs and KPIs, how many of these KRIs truly relates to a human resource risk or a human risk in itself, right? We do phishing simulations. We look at click rate as well, but is my click percentage or percentage of people who got phished in the last few exercises increasing or decreasing? What change do I make into the entire exercise or simulation or training? We really go back and sort of visit that. And then some of the other metric measurement that I want to talk about is factoring in the psychological indicators, right? Stress, fatigue, all of those are a key determinant of an individual doing the right thing versus the wrong thing. And unfortunately, at least in our present world or the system that we operate in, we do not have a way to bring that element and look into insider risk or security monitoring. I think it's important to sort of start thinking about it. And then AI and automation. Everybody's talking about AI, so do I. And I think it is important when it comes to leveraging some of this automation, when it comes to the human risk management or insider threat, is where we can do a real-time analysis. Think of a security training or a refresher or a phishing simulation, right? We are so inundated with the work. You run a simulation for 3, 4 days, then you go and pull the matrix another couple of days, then you prepare the dashboard and identify the people who have actually clicked on the phishing link and gave away their credentials. 7 days are gone. Then you reach out to that individual and say, hey, you know what? I want you to take up this particular training or come into a one-on-one because you clicked on a phishing email. Now that poor user, who is a business user, very, very probably less tech savvy, receives 500 emails in a day. And in that span of 10 days, that person has probably gone through 10,000 emails. So he or she does not even realize which phishing email, when did it come in, when did I click onto it, and what mistake did I do. So I think the shift that I'm talking about is more real time. Can we teach that individual at the moment the person is creating that error or that mistake? Yeah. Uh, Retrospective correction, retrospective training is probably not the best thing to do. And then many of our security knowledge programs, our trainings and awareness are very much driven by a standard set of training. Can we differentiate between users and the kind of work that they do, right? So if you want to identify the high risk users in the organization, who would they be, right? Somebody who has access to research and development data, somebody who has access to intellectual property. Can they be trained in a little better way because they really have a very, very high degree of exposure, right? We often don't do that. We often train people in the same way, right? But that's something that I urge each one of us to sort of think and see how can we tailor or customize our security awareness and trainings for people depending on the nature of the access, depending on the role and the work that they do for the organization. Yeah. Now, shifting gears from here, I wanted to dive a little bit about in a human mind. Like I said, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a shrink, but I think when we talk about humans and when we talk about humans committing an error, which can be an extremely costly affair for an organization in terms of reputation, regulatory affairs, customer attrition, and pure money, I think it is worth delving a little bit into the human element of it. There are these cognitive bias that exist in every security team, including me and my team as well. But then it is important to be able to understand them and see how does that plays a role in the way I do security in my organization. And if I'm not able to detect those bias, what it can cause is a blind spot in terms of decision making, in terms of estimation of the risk and overall confidence, right? And many times it's actually the reverse. And hence I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about how to identify those biases in the security process. Okay. You probably don't find it in any of the security books, but I think if you look at holistic or all around security, this is an important factor that we must consider as we design controls, run the controls, test them and deploy them. Okay. So the journey from being inefficient to efficient, right? What are the things that we sort of you need to keep in mind of? One very, very prevalent bias that we all experience is a normalcy, things that are normal to us. And this often the cause is because we will tend to ignore the early warning signs because we have never experienced a major breach. A case in point, somebody, has a tendency to click on every phishing email that comes his or her way. Yeah. But we sort of ignore that because we have never had a major breach. But can that person be the right target, which can cause a breach? Of course, yes. So we should always start with a clean slate. Don't look at things in a normal lens, is what I'm trying to say. Things that appears to be normal might not be normal, after all. Then the second bias that I have experienced and many of the security teams would experience is the optimism. Right? We always believe that employees that works with us are inherently trustworthy. They would not make any mistake. They would not have any malicious intent. And hence, it is okay not to monitor extensively. It is okay to relax the controls a little bit, which can be which can definitely backfire, right? Think about the slide one, think about the incidents that I spoke about. I think it is important that to be optimistic, but it's also important to be cautious, right? Zero trust essentially means trust, but also verify, right? The third bias that I want to talk about is overconfidence. And I have seen countless security teams and security professionals saying, you know what? I know exactly what my employee does throughout the day. I have full visibility into their logs, and hence, I think we are good. But this is the overconfidence bias that essentially drives us to underestimate the impact and the sophistication of an attack in itself. And if you look at these cyber crimes for the last 10 odd years, what has been the fundamental cause? What has been the vector? It is the basics, right? Somebody has downloaded a phishing email and clicked on a link, gave away the credentials. There was no MFA, or the system that person was operating from did not have the right kind of a patch. All of these are not very sophisticated method. The vectors are very, very basic in itself. And hence, that overconfidence can be a very, very crucial element to sort of being cognizant of. The next is the anchoring bias, right? Many times, a management or a certain section of the management will always say that, you know, this X department is a low risk department. They don't have access to information. They don't do much. They just work at spreadsheets. They don't have access to my CRMs or my customer information. It is okay not to deploy tools there or not to monitor them, right? And that is a potential overlook. And anything can happen from that particular team itself. If I'm an attacker, I would spray and pray. I do not really care what the management thinks, right? All I need is one unsuspecting individual falling prey to my phishing attack or connecting a USB drive which is loaded with the malware. And once I have that, you know, think of the kill chain. I can escalate the privilege. I can leapfrog within the network. I can go to the crown jewels, and then I can exfiltrate the information, right? So this anchoring bias is very important. Please consciously work towards this anchoring bias. Treat everybody in the same way, but also understand the unique nuances of risk that every department, every user is exposed to. Yeah. Then status quo. I think this is important because, you know, many a times you would approach and you would propose a stronger control, which can be a little intrusive to the user, but the management might be a little hesitant because it might disrupt the overall culture, right? It could be very open, relaxed culture. You can bring in any device. You can visit any website of your choice. You can open up your personal emails. You can go to Facebook and make a post while you're working, right? If that is a culture, then this is exactly where when you propose a stronger control, there might be resistance from the management. And that's the classic status quo culture, that maintain it in the way it is maintained. Why to unnecessarily disrupt the way things are, right? Then there are these framing effects, right? Now, what are these framing effects? It is important because if you look at a disgruntled user in the organization, how many times it has happened that somebody has, you know, been really, really unhappy and caused a disruption? 1 in 100, really a rare occurrence. But that rare occurrence becomes because of frame. You know, it sort of becomes a normal, and then you tend to overlook the common events, like somebody accidentally leaking information, somebody accidentally sending out a customer information to a wrong individual by email, and so on and so forth. Then, you know, security leaders will always relate to this. There's this sunk cost fallacy that always exists in the world. You might have a security tool which is pretty old, not efficient, outdated, does not do the job that it's supposed to do. But you might not be able to migrate to a better tool because of the investment that has already been made. So the cost is already sunk, and, you know, you will definitely have a lot of resistance trying to change that and bring a new solution in. So change management is important. The ability to drive the cost of security return is also very, very difficult in such cases. And last but not the least, and this is not you know, insulting to anyone at all, is the Dunning-Kruger effect. What is this effect? It essentially means when there is a lot of overconfidence in the teams, you know, teams will have so much of reliance on their expertise that they will stop taking suggestions or feedbacks from the experts, right? So the security team would say, I am a security expert. I know my tools. I know the security process is better. I don't need to go and talk to anybody else, or, you know, get an audit done, or maybe bring in a third party to test my controls and tell me where can I improve. And that's the classic Dunning-Kruger effect. The reason why I sort of deviated from a technology topic to a more human oriented topic, because we are talking about human risk. And human risk is essentially very, very behavioral driven. And like I said earlier, we do very well when it comes to technology controls, but we do not do very well when it comes to a combination of technology as well as human controls, right? So I hope that this gives you a very fresh perspective to take a look at things that we've been doing so far and help you make certain changes incrementally, but changes in your organization as you go back. Now, you might ask the question that you spoke a lot about things that doesn't work. You spoke about things that should change. But if I were to take a stab at HRM or human risk management, how would I do it? Uh, and here is where I would give you a disclaimer. There is no silver bullet. There is no one size fits all approach. All right. It can be looked into multiple different ways and perspective. Every organization is different. Your attack surface, your risk appetite is going to be very, very different. Your culture is going to be different. The tool set that you have can be very, very different. But if I were to talk about an optimized way of managing human resource management, I would first look at demystifying what does this insider threat looks like. And I want to talk about the kill chain a little bit. Every attack will follow a cyclic pattern. And then you can look at every cyber event breaches that have happened in the past. You can always map the activities into the kill chain in itself, right? While the cyber kill chain is very, very famous, this is the insider threat kill chain. So how does it work? One is, of course, recon. So somebody with a bad intent and a bad motive will try and see where all the crown jewels are, what data can, help them in multiple different ways. Either it's a financial gain or it's a competitive advantage professionally, and so on and so forth. So the recon phase is where people will try and download multiple things. People will try and get access to systems that the person might not need for their legitimate business work, and then comes the next phase, which is circumvention. They will try and test controls. They'll try and see, can I bypass a control? Can I ask my friendly IT admin to say, hey, you know what? Let's go for a coffee, but before that, can you help me install this software? I don't want to open a ticket. I don't want to leave a paper trail, right? So methods to circumvent the control, bypass the control. Third is aggregation. Once you have a control, once you did the recon, you sort of scoped out where the data exists and what can bring you the benefit. Then you start pulling the data and aggregate it, right? You don't take out everything at one go, but you try and see if you can hoard the data, if you can, put them together, which you can use later on at some point in time. And that's a third phase, which we call as an aggregation phase. The next phase is obfuscation, right? Now, one might say that are the users that smart? Yeah. And to that, my response would be yes. If you think about the first slide, Edward Snowden was outrightly brilliant, right? Chelsea Manning was outrightly brilliant with a IQ of more than 220. All right. Now, if people want to do something bad, they have the right motivation, the right skills, and the right opportunity, they would end up doing it. And hence, do not underestimate an insider, right? And while obfuscation is a technical word, essentially means they will try to hide the data in a plain sight. They will try to hide their actions in a way that it does not hit the triggers. It does not ring a bell to the security team. It will not generate an alarm, right? So you'll have to find out intuitive ways to see how can we detect better? How can I, monitor better? All that becomes very, very important. And the last stage is exfiltration. Now, it can be exfiltration, it can be exploitation. Somebody can take data out, somebody can, place a logic bomb, somebody can, set a time logic where, the moment they leave the organization, the system will crash. Many things can happen. But essentially, it is important to look at this kill chain and understand the phases of how an insider threat or a risk really materializes. And then comes the approach and breaking it down into an actionable way to build a process. All right. So here is my approach to human risk management. Is this a silver bullet? It is not. Is it the holy grail of insider risk management? It is definitely not, but this is just my approach. And there's going to be a lot of text in it, so bear with me, pay attention. I will try and break down into simpler ways to sort of elude how can we transform our insider risk management process, our human risk management function from just a risk-aware function to a risk-managed function. All right. I would always start with something that I call it the security basics. And like I was was saying earlier as well, the key vector for every incident is always something that is known as a basic, but we have not done it. And hence, it is imperative that as a security team, as an IT team, we must do the basics very, very well. Patching on time, blocking those USBs, monitoring your website controls and access, ensuring that your print is controlled, access are given in the right time. There is a periodic reconciliation of the access and permissions. All of these are basics, and we must do this very, very well. All right. The second is, I spoke about this a little bit earlier as well. How do we classify users based on the value and based on the risk? Full-time employee versus contractor, remote versus, on-site, bring your own device versus managed device. What kind of access do they have to the crown jewels? What kind of technology exceptions do they have? Each of these will help you to decide and risk tier individuals in their own unique ways. If you start a dragnet monitoring, if you start applying the same lens to look at everybody, that might not be the most efficient way to look at insider risk. The second element is conditional and contextual access. I spoke about this a little bit, and it is difficult, but it is important to be able to implement. How does an access being granted to an individual, right? Just the username and password and MFA prompt, is that sufficient? Or do you also want to take a look at a deeper detail, the time of access, the IP they're coming from, the geography, the resource that they're trying to access? Has there been historical failed logins? Has there been any anomalous login patterns? All of that is very, very important. Do we have the ability to detect if there's a rogue device that is being connected into the network? Yeah, many times we don't. And then mapping an asset which is given or managed by the corporate to a user type. The shadow IT is a really, really important risk in this entire parameter. So it's important to be able to map a user vis-a-vis the asset. Many times you might find an asset which is orphan. There is no user associated with it, but that asset might have a lot of things going on, and you cannot attribute the actions to an individual. Hence, it's always important to maintain that inventory right. And then this is an area which I don't think we do, but we must do. We spoke about the behavioral patterns. We spoke about how frustration, emotional drain out or burnout can cause a problem to do in a person to do things that are wrong. And that means partnering with HR. Can there be an early warning monitoring system? And why HR is important? Because HR is the linchpin, is the foundational program that talks to every users and every managers in the organization. Now imagine if an HR is, with your help, can create an early warning system, RYG, red, yellow, green candidates. You don't need to probably monitor the green ones, but you might need to pay a little bit of attention to the yellow candidates. These are the candidates who are potentially maybe not happy with their work, has maybe expressed dissatisfaction with their managers or certain aspects of work. Can they be a candidate for crime? Of course, yes. And then the red cases. The red cases could be the ones that are, have displayed extreme tardiness at work. Somebody who has, visibly being disgruntled, very, very unhappy. Somebody who's been talking and being vocal about things that they don't like in the organization, or maybe openly searching for a job, or in a good sense in a relationship with somebody who is serving a notice period. All of these are the red zone candidates. Now imagine if you have that visibility and if you customize your monitoring as per those RYG candidates, wouldn't it make your life much more easier? Definitely it would, right? Then understanding the crown jewels, and this is the bane of our life. We put DLP into everything. We put all our security tools into everywhere else, and then we pretty much drink from the hose. We look at thousands of alerts. But what if you don't monitor everything? Let everything get logged so that you can go back and take a look at it historically if you need to do a forensic. But what if your active monitoring is only focused to your crown jewels? You have a CRM, that's where your customer data is. You have an ERP where you have sales, budget, customer information. Focus only events and alerts that's coming out of it. It's a better way of prioritization, right? And then it is very closely tied by the asset and their value. Now you might have got 60 applications. Does all 60 has confidential information? Does all 60 has personal information of customers or employees? May not be the case. Then if that is the case, why are we monitoring all alerts in a same way from all 60 systems? Does not make sense, right? So there has to be a degree of prioritization with the value of the asset and the risk that it is exposed to. And then talking about the tools, how do we determine that the the security tools that we currently have in the organization are really, really efficient, and then, and most important is security is binary. How many times it has happened that you pick up a device and realize that this device does not have a DLP agent sitting on it, or maybe the DLP agent is pretty old, never been updated, hence not doing its job, right? Happens all the time. And this is exactly where the game of binary being nature comes into the play. How do we ensure that your most important security tools are deployed in all systems in your organization? If you don't, then that's the chink in the armor. That's the device that causes problem, right? And then our job is also to be able to help the business, sustain the business, create a very positive behavior and experience to the users as well. To the extent possible, can we focus on telemetry or indicators from the system without noise? Now imagine if security is right on your face. Everything you try to do, there's a warning message in red with a skull saying, information security alert, you're not supposed to do this. Information security notification, this is prohibited. It would definitely cause a lot of bad user experience. And I think that's one of the reasons why our partnership with business users, is really, really strained. So if we can focus on getting telemetry, which is noise free, which is working in the background, which is not very intrusive, I think that's the best possible way. And then who are those people who are running those tools, our teams, each one of us, and how good are we in those tools, right? You might have the best in class tool, but if you do not have the best in class operator, that tool is pretty much useless in itself. If you do not fine tune and configure the tool in its best possible way frequently again and again and again, that tool will render useless. So the investment is definitely gone down the drain. So these two needs to be tied very well. And then this is what I also sort of alluded earlier as well. Can we do user training in a much more adaptive fashion? How can I articulate and communicate what is the acceptable behavioral standard when it comes to technology usage and security in the organization? Many a times we expect users to be able to follow those baselines without even talking about it, right? And when user commits a mistake, we go back and say, hey, this is not the right thing to do. This is how you should be doing it. What if we over communicate? What if we proactively reach out to people and say, email usage practice, this is the right way. Anything you want to download, talk to your IT team, talk to your security team. Don't try and download anything on your own, right? If we articulate and communicate the best practices and the acceptable behavioral standards and the usage standard, that puts us on an even ground with the users and the technology teams. And then positive reinforcement, spoken about this earlier as well. How do we create a culture where there is no retaliation? And I tell you, it is very important to sort of practice it, is because you want people to come back and partner with you. Security teams are leaner and thinner. You don't have, army of 1,000 people looking into every users, and hence this partnership with users is very, very important. Now, if you chastise and reprimand and yell at every individual creating a mistake, you will alienate yourself. And hence, what is very, very important is to be able to create a safe environment for people so that they can comfortably come and say, hey, you know what? I sent out a document to a wrong person at the wrong time. Yeah. And then coach them further. So that no retaliation environment will help two things. One, you build a partnership. Number two, people will not shy away from reporting events or alerts or incidents. We need people to come back and report to us, right? That's how you gain telemetry. That's how you understand what's going on. That's how you improve security functions. And hence that is important. How many times it happened that you reward people with the right behavior? Do you have a set award every quarter along with the R&R? You call out some individual and say, here, you know what? You display the right behavior. You did the right thing. You notified us of a security event. You helped us avert a major issue. And hence, this is the award for you. And make it known, make it public. Let the leadership talk about it. It could be the town halls, it could be the all-hand meetings, but we really need to publicize those good actions by the employees. That is how we build a relationship. And then last but not the least, and this is where I really want you to pay focus on, let's move away from the traditional monitoring of whatever is coming in. Let's go and look at everything else. No. What if we are able to dynamically generate a risk score for every individual, depending on the nature of his employment, depending on the device that person uses, depending on the risky behaviors, and depending on the access that person has. Now, one person can be absolutely low risk one day. Tomorrow, if that person suddenly starts trying to bypass different controls or goes to websites that are not known for work, or attempts to download information, or attempts to send out mass information from his email or OneDrive or SharePoint, that's risky behavior. And if that risky behavior, is factored in, and that drives up the risk score of an individual, suddenly, if you have 1,000 people in the organization, instead of monitoring all 1,000 at the same time, you will probably end up monitoring the top 20%, which could be the 50 people itself. Now, imagine if that is the case, then every alert that comes your way is justified. You are able to correlate it better. You are able to look at it, investigate, triage, and handle it in a much more better fashion. And this is a very, very dynamic scoring. So today, if somebody's in a high risk score zone, once they start displaying the right behavior, their risky pattern subsides, they might fall into a yellow or a green zone, and then you don't need to monitor that individual, right? Because the behaviors are not static. Why should your monitoring be static in a case, right? And then this could be a little controversial, but then, keeping in mind the privacy implications as well, talking to privacy office as well. If you really have a high value user and with a high risk as well, somebody who has access to crown jewels, has elevated access to almost every systems, it might be worth to bring in external data set as well into your overall analytics. That means social media insights, that means analysis of sentiments. And once you bring in the internal information that you already have and the external information, it helps you to understand the risk profile a lot better. Imagine you have a potential candidate who is in the green zone, does not have a risky behavior, but you know that the person is probably not happy or serving a notice period. You bring in social media data and you see how that person is actively talking about things that he or she does not like in the organization, right? That's a red flag. Now imagine that data point coming in. Overall, it bumps the score into a high risk zone. It will give you a lot of insight. It will give you a lot of inputs in how you look at overall risk management in itself. And with that, the journey, the transformation from being risk aware simply to being risk management. And I think this could be an easier way to sort of, cover this particular journey. I don't have any takeaways for this particular session, but I believe and I hope that I've been able to share things that might have been new, might help you to, get your creative juices running, give you a fresh perspective in the way we do security, and specifically insider risk and insider threat. And going back, as you look at your process, as you try and attempt to redesign or change certain elements in how you look at human as a risk in the organization, it will not be that proverbial needle in a haystack, but it might be a needle as large as this, and you can easily find it when you need to find it. Yeah, there's a lot of talking. Thank you very much for your patient listening. I'm gonna stop the presentation, and I think we will now have the mics enabled for each one of you, so that if you have any question, you can go ahead and ask. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. That was a wonderful presentation. And yep, I guess all the participants have the access to their mics and as well as to the chat. So if anyone is having any questions, you can either unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat.
And there is no good question or a bad question or a right question or a wrong question. So it can be relevant to the topic. It can be about any other topic related to cybersecurity. If you have any question, if you have any inputs or feedback, or if there is something that has not been covered but you think is important and you currently do, or you have seen somebody doing it, by all means, please do feel free to share.
Hi, Subhajit. Am I audible?
Yes, Rudran, hi.
Thank you a lot for this presentation. It was extremely comprehensive on the topic here. I had a very brief query insofar as risk scoring for individuals, right?
Mhm.
Now, if you're looking at a larger organization, let's say something of 1,000 plus, maybe 10,000 individuals across the globe, it is not a realistic possibility to create a risk scoring. Of course, you can automate it. And then, at the time of onboarding or something like that, we can have a basic risk scoring, but it's not going to be extremely effective. So in the alternative, what would, if we do a class of employees, right? Like you said, there are privileged role holders and who have easy access to a lot of confidential data and files, etc. So if is risk scoring based on class of employee practicable? If it is ideally more practicable than individual scoring, and would it be effective?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you so much for asking this, Rudran. Um, Let me approach your question in a different way. All right. Understanding and determining the class of the users, and I would not just restrict myself to users, but also to the asset, is an important input or a feedback to the overall scoring in itself, right? But can you score only basis the user or the user access or the device? Yes, there can be a multiple correlation, multiple combination can be done with that. Answering the first part of your question, I have my first patent that I filed, was with an US bank, and this is one of the mega US bank with close to 500,000 endpoints and users all across the globe. And we implemented an insider threat monitoring program. We named it as Instinct, and um, it it beautifully generated dynamic risk scoring for more than 50,000 users all across the globe. Yeah, it is difficult. You need a lot of computing horsepower behind it. You're right, but it can be automated, and we wanted to move away from the traditional monitoring, and we wanted to do a risk-based monitoring in itself because there were a lot of insider events that were coming by, and obviously, there was a dedicated team who was managing it, but we've been able to do it. So technically, it is possible for a large organization, for a small organization as well. It depends on how ready we are, what kind of computational resources that we can put in behind it, and the logic and the program that you're building. So we ended up building a tool of our own, right? Because it's a large organization, budgets were available, and the risk was material, so we could do it. But answering your question, uh, we will have to customize our solution depending on what we can do versus what we cannot do. There is always this game of risk and reward, right? You cannot spend a crore worth of rupees in building a tool that might not yield anything better. So it will completely outweigh the reward in itself. So depending on your unique risk exposure, if you think that just by scoring, depending on the user class or the asset class or by access or a combination of it, will give you the desired result, and it will help you to fine tune, narrow, and sharpen the monitoring program, it is absolutely fine. There is no right or wrong answer to that. Does it help?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And your point on the investment versus what we save, right? Like you gave an average of the cost of an incident for a
Yeah,
company. So if
yeah.
the incident cost is much lower than the implementation of such a system, then yeah, it doesn't
It makes no
uh,
sense.
gel well. Thank you.
Very
Thank you so
true.
much.
Very true. Thank you for asking.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat. So the first one is like, what precautions should take for cybersecurity in power sector?
Okay, wonderful. All right. So I might not understand the complete context of this particular question, but if you look at the power sector, I think the entire environment is a little different. It has a combination of OT as well in power. And in a modern power plants, if you will call it, you would have a lot of autonomous systems. You will have a lot of ICS, SCADA systems as well. And hence, there has to be a right harmonization of your traditional IT controls and also OT controls. And in fact, in power plants today or in power sector as well, there is a lot of usage of IoT and IIoTs, a lot of use of data lakes as well. So there is no air gapping. But my approach towards any industry which has IT and OT combination would be to sort of harmonize it together, understand OT better. If budget approves, having a foolproof OT security solution that helps you to do a monitoring at a layer 2 and layer 3 level, bring those insights into your centralized SOC so that you don't do a differentiated risk management or monitoring for IT and OT, but you do harmonized in orchestration fashion. I hope that answers, but if there is none, please feel free to reach out to LinkedIn and we can of course have a discussion. I think there's a next question.
Yes.
Sorry.
Are there articles, academic papers, or standards available to tackle insider threats and human-related cyber risk and frauds, or any specific organization whose specialty is in this area?
There is. I can't talk about an individual OEM or a company because that would be endorsement and that I don't want to do. But if you research, you will find organizations or companies that are specifically working into HRM space and creating and developing, and they're already live in the market. And they are extensively providing platforms to organizations that looks at human risk elements of it. And there are some of the wonderful platforms that uses a lot of it that I spoke as well. Those human biases, those behavioral indicators, all of this. I cannot take names, but you would research, and those are very common, well-known names. I'm sure you would find some of them.
Thank you, sir. What is the function of threat intelligence? Suggest some tools.
Again, I can't name the tools, but I can tell you how a threat intelligence needs to be used. If I were to use my budget in an optimized fashion, I would look at a combination of a tool that does two things for me. One, gives me threat intelligence of what is happening outside the world, which could be relevant to me. A threat intelligence tool that not only leverages open source intelligence, but also analyst-driven signal intelligence, electrical intelligence, and radio intelligence, and human intelligence as well. So there are multiple different kinds of intelligence. OSINT is one, open source. Then there is electronic signals and human. I would look at a tool that gives me all four of them. I would look at a tool that would help me with analyst support that speak multiple languages, Russian, Chinese, Ukrainian, Cantonese, and so on and so forth. And also a tool that distills the threat intel and tells me what is relevant for me. That's one part of the tool. The second part of the tool, if I were to select, is something that also gives me an understanding of my attack surface in itself. What digital assets do I have? Where are they exposed to? Are there any risk? Are any of my assets, and asset is also people and credential, are at risk? Are there any chatter about me or my organization or my users or my VIPs in the dark web or deep web? A combination of all of this is a best threat intelligence, but it's also very, very need-based, in my opinion. Just because everybody is talking about TI and TS, it does not mean that I would need one. But if I really need one, I would very clearly articulate my use cases. Why do I need this particular tool for? And pick up a tool that will fulfill those use cases in the first place. Yeah. Thank you, Manik.
Thank you, sir. Yes, and yep, I request the participants, like if still someone has any questions, yeah, can feel free to unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. Yeah.
I guess not, Sai.
Yes, sir. Yes, and I guess there are no more questions, sir. But yeah, so yes, as sir mentioned, like yeah, you can just get in touch with sir over LinkedIn, or you can just drop us if you're having any queries, so we can take it towards Subhajit sir and get back to you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Sai, Dr. Sriram. I'm not sure if it's here or not, but thank you to DSAI, CCoE for having me here. And thanks to each and every participant for your patient listening. Really appreciate you making time for this particular presentation. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much on behalf of the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence for joining us today for the PrivSec Spotlight CISO and DPO series. And I once again thank all the participants for being here and taking part in this session. Until next time, we'll get back to you with another speaker, another session. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.